Friends, and welcome to this episode of the Steve Beaman Journey. I'm Steve Beaman, and it's a pleasure to have you back today. There's an awful lot going on, and we want to continue to talk about the shutdown clearly in the government and what that's doing to us. But I've titled this first section, The Hall of Lies. I want to talk to you about why we trust Washington anyway with anything. And we're going to cover a lot of issues that have come up over the last 100 years on why we shouldn't trust Washington. Secondly, I'm going to talk with you today about this push by Donald Trump and the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, to put in a U.S. sovereign fund. What does that mean? What can it do for you? And how could it be good, but probably will turn out bad? Well, let's unpack all of that on this episode of the Steve Beaman Show.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In a world of uncertainty, where business, freedom, and the future hang in the balance, one voice rises with clarity, experience, wisdom, and conviction. This is the Steve Beaman Show, the voice of the independent American.
Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for joining me on this episode of the show. We've seen a lot going on in the past few days with this shutdown in Washington, and it really makes me think about why in the world do you and I trust Washington at all? Why do we let them have the power to impact our lives? This shutdown shouldn't affect us at all. It's their game. Let them play it. The politicians who cause it don't suffer. They still get their wages. It's the 60% of federal employees who are furloughed who are temporarily hurt, but they get their back wages when they go back to work. The question that should be asked is, why would you and I give any power to these people in Washington? And I thought about it, and I thought about the Hall of Lies, the fact that they've been lying to us for 130 years or more, and it's obvious and it's crystal clear that they do it. So I put together a listing of lies that have come out of this government that supposedly serves us, just to put it in perspective. So those of you who are looking at this kind of issue in your next voting kind of positions, think about who can you really trust. And this is true on the right and the left. So we're going to be neutral on that political stance today. We're going to go through the lies that they've told us. Let me start back in 1913. Woodrow Wilson was president, and he, for the first time, Civil War had a bit of one, but for the first time he really instituted an income tax. Now, he did it because he saw the war brewing in Europe, and he knew the U.S. needed to beef up its military, so he wanted to get money in. Well, it was sold to the American people, get this, as a temporary tax only for the millionaires. That's right. They were doing the class warfare thing back then too. And Wilson put this out as a short-term temporary tax only on the wealthiest. Well, how's that worked out for you, middle America? They came to you because that's where all the money is. 1913 also saw the institution of the Federal Reserve Act. And let's talk about this, the Federal Reserve, sometimes referred to as the creature from Jekyll Island. Well, let's think about what happened here. Throughout the kind of formation of the country there'd been a debate about whether the United States should have a central bank. One of the biggest problems that the country had not having a central bank is that when the federal government wanted to borrow money, it had to go to you. It had to sell you on buying one of its bonds. Well, that's inconvenient for the government. They don't like having that problem. And they don't like having you have control over their money. So in 1913, they created the Federal Reserve Act, and they sold it to us as a stabilizing thing. This will stabilize the banks. This will stabilize our country under one consistent currency. And, well, we're not going to tell you this, but it's going to let us borrow from them instead of you. So the Federal Reserve Act is sold to you as a stabilizing thing, but in reality is a backdoor slush fund for the government. Now let's look at how the Federal Reserve is done. They are primarily, if you look at it, the cause behind the Great Depression. Because when the markets crashed and the economy contracted, well, what did the Fed do? It contracted. It stopped putting money in the economy and decided that it would contract the money. Now, they learned a lesson from that in 2008. And when 2008's banking system happened, or crisis, the Fed flooded money into it. But the Fed has had mixed reviews at best, right? They've devalued our currency some 90% since they were instituted. Now, inflation's a funny tax. We all pay it. And the reality is, it's, our lifestyle's improved. So there are different metrics on which you can measure it. But the Federal Reserve was sold to you as this stabilizing thing, and in reality has allowed our government to run up $37 trillion in debt. You have to pay that back. I have to pay that back, and our kids and grandkids do. But let's continue with the Hall of Lies, because it doesn't stop there. 1917, they created the Committee on Public Information. This was to control the information about World War I, because they didn't want the press and they didn't want people speaking poorly of World War I. So they put out a propaganda committee. They promised truth, of course, but they delivered government-controlled narratives. There was no such thing as truth to it. 1917-18, they deployed the Espionage and Sedition Act. This had been done during the Civil War, where Abraham Lincoln put people in jail. But in 1917 and 18, the government went back to putting people in jail for speaking out against it. The more power they have, the more they're going to abuse. Let's go up to Franklin Roosevelt. Now, I know there are a lot of people, especially in my grandparents' generation, who put Roosevelt up on pillars and say this man saved democracy and saved our nation. And we could have a discussion about that another day as to whether that's true or not. But let's look at some of the things he did. One of the first things, in 1933, he confiscated your gold. He made the unilateral decision that Americans should no longer own gold. He wanted to force you into using the US dollar as opposed to gold. And by forcing you to do that, you had to put your money in the banks. It was part of his Saving the Banks program. So is this power we want the president to have? Is it really power to say you can't own silver, you can't own gold, you can't own a gun? Is this really power we want to give them? Because if you go down even further, let me start with another Roosevelt program in 35. He puts in Social Security. Now, Social Security has been the love child of the American people. But when it was put in, it was sold to you as an insurance program. You put money in when you're young, and when you're older, you draw that money out plus interest. It's never been an insurance program. It's never been anywhere remotely close to that. If an insurance company ran itself like Social Security does, they'd all be in jail. Here's the way it works. The workers, the people who get W-2 income or independents, pay in 15% of their wages. Now, if you get a W-2 wage, you say, well, I'm only paying out 7.5. Now, your employer pays the other 7.5, and that is out of your pocket, because if they didn't have to pay that, they could pay it to you. But you pay in 15% today of your wage. That money is immediately paid out to the older people who are drawing benefits. There's no trust fund. This trust fund they talk about, let me touch on that. When money goes in and you say, okay, so there's excess money into the system, what's it used for? What does the government do with that? Well, they borrow it. They borrow money out of Social Security to spend it on current accounts. And they put into Social Security a special bond of the government. It's not a normal note, bill, or bond. It's a special bond. But it's still a debt. The government borrows the money out, puts in a bond, and says, hey, everybody's happy. Well, what's happened over time, as the baby boomers especially start to retire, there are many more people drawing out of Social Security than putting into Social Security. And that creates a problem, because the government now has to pay back those bonds with real cash. Well, because the government doesn't have real cash, it has to go out into the markets and borrow it. So we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. That is a really unhealthy way to run. But again, going back to when it was sold to you, it's an insurance program. The examples of federal government dishonesty are all over the place. 1937, Roosevelt's on riding a high horse coming out of the transition in, the economy back to somewhat normal. He starts to pack the court. We heard that from the Democrats today. We hear it from Trump. We hear it from everybody. Let's pack the court. The court doesn't like what we're doing vis-a-vis the Constitution, so let's just pack the court. Roosevelt was one of the first to start to try to do that. Again, you want to give these people power, it's going to come back and bite you. Go up post-World War II. The 1947 creation of the National Security Act. It created the CIA and the NSA. Okay, these were created to go do spying on the bad guys. What's it morphed into? Spying on you. And if you don't think that's true, go watch Ed Snowden's information. He's the naval analyst who came out and proved they were using their technology to spy on you. So are they using these for benevolent things? Are they using this power we continue to grant them for good? Or are they using it against us? It is a true fact that the more power you give any institution in Washington, the more power it wants to accumulate and the more it will use that power against you. But let's continue. You have the Vietnam War where Nixon or Johnson and then Nixon both said this is a winnable war, we're doing fine, everything's going to be great. Well, the problem is that was a lie. The Pentagon Papers came out and proved they knew we couldn't win the war. But they continued to tell you and me, all is great, all is rosy, things are fine. Well, no, they weren't, and they were lying to you directly. Continue up, Watergate. Think about that whole thing. The executive power was weaponized against people. And even Nixon admitted it. I mean, what was his famous statement? When the president does it, it's not illegal. Well, yeah, it still is, because as we've learned, no one is above the law, not the president, not the Senate, nobody. We, the people, are to be the ones in charge of this government. Watergate was an example where we weren't. But it continues. Go to the Patriot Act put in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks. Okay, this was just for emergencies. This was just to protect the American people from, seeing this bad stuff and having this bad stuff happen. What really resulted? It was a push on the CIA and the NSA. Again, go back to Ed Snowden. He proved that the government uses those powers to spy on you. Now, you may not be scared of that because you say, well, I don't do anything wrong. Well, you better be careful on defining wrong. Go back to the Alien Sedition Act that Woodrow Wilson put in. Doing wrong was speaking out against him. I know a lot of you people on the left are saying, look, Trump's doing the same thing. He's putting military in the streets. I am a supporter of, Donald Trump's policies, generally speaking. But with that said, it doesn't mean that I give carte blanche to the government to do anything. We, the people, should not be worried if they want to shut down. We've given them too much authority over our lives. And if you're involved in one of the social welfare systems, you've set yourself up for real problems. Now, you could argue Social Security is over here because it's supposed to be insurance. We get back our own money. Well, we know it's not. It's akin to a Ponzi scheme, even though it's not directly. You go to Medicare and Medicaid, if you're living on those programs, this government can take those away real quick. They can means test it. They can put income brackets on it. They can do all kinds of stuff. They can tax it. They can do things because we've given them the power to do it. I want you to think real long and hard when you're voting for people in Washington, especially at the presidential level, and then at the Senate and congressional levels. Are you voting for people who are there to serve you? Or are they there to accumulate their own power, which will be turned against you? I mean, go back. There's example after example. President Obama. President Obama said, if you want to keep your insurance or your medical doctors, you can. I mean, this has gone on and on and on. This is a quick blip from The Economist. And that's no, conservative magazine, but let's take a look at what they say.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
That means allowing Americans who like their doctor and like their health care plan to keep their plan.
What do these statements have in common? Well, they were all made by American presidents, and they have all, rather famously, been called lies.
The fact of the matter is, going back forever, power corrupts, ultimate power corrupts ultimately. We know the people in Washington are not out to serve you. By and large, they're out to serve themselves. And let me give you a specific thing to look at. There's an old thing in life, follow the money. How many politicians, senators, and congresspeople have become multimillionaires off of their work in Washington? A lot of them. But they don't make the income to do that. Their salaries alone barely pay their expenses of living in their home district plus the housing in Washington. So how does that happen? How do they make millions? Well, they insider trade, which is legal for them, but not for you and me. They keep campaign funds to live lavish lifestyles and do things. The fact is, politicians are out to serve politicians. And the only big thing about this shutdown that has me upset is that people care about it. Why have we given them so much authority that we actually care that they're shut down? Now, as we continue on this, and I wanted to, for 100 years, they've been lying to us. It never stops. So why do we trust them? Why do we trust them at all? And I don't think we should. And that leads me to the second segment today, which is this idea of a sovereign fund. Let me play a quick clip for you and let you get caught up on where we are on that.
The extraordinary size and scale of the U.S. government and the business it does with companies should create value for American citizens. If we are going to buy 2 billion COVID vaccines, maybe we should have some warrants and some equity in these companies and have that grow for the help of the American people. So I bring all these things together. I think Scott and I will create an amazing sovereign wealth fund for you, sir.
So what is a sovereign fund? What are we trying to do here? I mean, it sounds attractive. Trump wants to build wealth for America. What this basically says is the government is going to go out and buy interest in private companies. Oh, wait, we've heard that before. And for those of you who are the MAGA Trump supporters, and again, I'm pretty much one of you. I believe in Make America Great. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I believe that America first is the way we ought to run things. This is America. The better we do, the better the globe will do. So I believe in America first. But this idea that the Trump administration has that they can build a sovereign fund that will be benevolent for your benefit, oh, give me a break. This is what we're going to write about in 50 years and go, how could they do it? I want you to remember, other presidents have done this. You know who was chief among it? Take a look at this video.
Solyndra, this is a loan guarantee program that predates me, that historically has had support from Democrats and Republicans as well. And the idea is pretty straightforward. If we are going to be able to compete in the 21st century, then we've got to dominate cutting-edge technologies. We've got to dominate cutting-edge manufacturing. Clean energy is part of that package of technologies of the future that have to be based here in the United States if we're going to be able to succeed.
He's talking about Solyndra. Now, many of you remember that. Remember when Barack Obama wanted to put money into companies that were there for our strategic benefit, and the right, the Tea Party, came out and said, he's a socialist. He's a communist. He wants to buy the means of production. Let's remember what a socialist is. That's the person who says the government knows better how to run the economy. Therefore, the government will buy interests in private companies and tell them what to produce. Okay? So when Obama did it, it was socialism. When Trump wants to do it, oh, it's wonderful. No, this is enormously dangerous. First of all, look at what happens for most sovereign funds. They are created by governments that run surpluses. Typically, these are the oil-rich countries. And so instead of giving the money back to their population, which they're hardly democracies, they're monarchies, they build this sovereign wealth fund to serve themselves. And they use it as a private equity fund. They buy into companies. Now, the reality is we don't have a surplus. I don't know if you knew this or not, but we're way in debt. We're some $37 trillion in debt. So where the hell's the money coming from? If you've got excess money in Washington, send it back to us. We're better allocators of capital than you. And I know some of you are going to say, well, Donald Trump's different. Donald Trump and his team are smart financial guys. They've built companies. They've done it right. Fine, great. I give that to you. What about the next guy to come into power? What about 3 presidents downstream? Do we want to give them this kind of power? Do we want them picking winners and losers in the business community? And what happens when they invest in a company that doesn't do well? It's Washington. They're not going to walk away and let the market take over. They're going to put more money into it. So it'll become a black hole. And it's an economy built off who you know. It's not built off market discipline and market principles. It's who do you know? That's the concern I have with this. Again, instead of debt, this becomes another honeypot for federal officials. It's just another slush fund they can use. I mean, you folks, you pay off your debts before you go gambling. Well, why should our government, be able to gamble money that we don't have? Now, let me tie in a couple things to this. And I actually pulled data on this. I think this is fascinating. I was looking at the one possible silver lining to this. And this is going to make a lot of people really, really upset. But it's going to show you where Trump might be on this. The biggest value held by the United States government is in land. I think we own 640 million acres of land, and the value of it is in the $100 trillion range. It's possible that Trump is thinking, let's monetize the land. We could pay off our debt. We could, enormously boost up the economy. We could put more productive resources into play. So he might very well be looking at that land. And if he puts that into the sovereign fund as opposed to just sitting where it is now, well, that's a game changer. I'd like to see land privatized, but the sovereign fund becomes kind of a dangerous way to do that. You can just privatize it outright. I don't want to give another slush fund to government. I don't want them picking winners and losers in the business world. I don't want them saying this is a strategic good, so we're going to put money. Scott Bessent came out and said, well, we in the government have a responsibility to help our citizens with things that are good. He said it's good for people to own homes. The government should support that. Well, wait a minute. If that owning a house is good, who decides that? The government? And what, they tried that through the 2000s. Don't we remember how that ended up? When government makes dictates from on high, they don't end well. So the whole notion of a sovereign fund saying, I'm going to buy into this strategic company like Solyndra, they're going to put money in it, and when it starts to do poorly, they're going to put more money into it. Well, how much of a leg up does that give them against their competition? I mean, we saw it in 2008 and 9, right? The government went in and bailed out General Motors and bailed out Chrysler. Ford didn't take a dime. Ford is now the successful company. Why? Because they let the market dynamics force their behavior. GM just became a sloth. And I'm sorry for the people who work at GM. I mean, I empathize with you. We've seen massive transitions in labor, and you're continuing to see it with robotics coming in. That affects you. But the solution to it isn't to get the government involved. That's the contra solution. That's the opposite of what you need to do. You need to have more market forces driving your behavior. So on the sovereign fund, to me, it's going to play into this whole thing of victimnomics. And victimnomics, I've kind of coined a phrase to talk about an economy based on building victims. And that's what Washington does. You're a victim of this. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I think what you'll have is the sovereign fund is going to be sold as another victonomics type thing. I think the sovereign fund is going to be sold as we're going to build wealth. But if you peel away the onion, it's giving unbridled power to the Secretary of Treasury. Unbridled, unknown power. And Lutton, it's the Secretary of Commerce, I think. Those guys are going to decide where money's allocated. I'd rather Warren Buffett did it, thank you very much. And if they do start to put our land into that sovereign fund, well, those of you who want the federal government to own land, most of which is out west, that's not going to make you very happy because they'll liquidate it. They'll monetize that land. Now, again, I think they should. I just don't like how they do it. So this is another example in my mind of where they're going to promise you something that at the end of the day, and our children and grandchildren will pay for this, it's going to come out as another great big government slush fund. And you can love Donald Trump all you want. You can think he's exactly in the right mode. He's doing exactly the right things, but he won't always be president. And what you're doing is setting up something that will exist for a long time. And it won't be long before they're raising taxes to put in the sovereign fund. And they're going to tell you, this is your wealth. This is how your Social Security will get paid. This is how your Medicare will get paid. We're going to use the sovereign fund to fund these things, so we need you to pay more into it. Look how smart we are running companies. I mean, we tried this in the Soviet Union. It didn't work very well. In the early 1990s, late 1980s, I took people from Belarus Machinery through the U.S. This was a Soviet tractor company. They were studying distribution and those kinds of things. They couldn't understand why the U.S. economy was so powerful. At the end of about a month, they came to understand it's called competition. And competition is healthy. It's not an unhealthy thing. But our schools today teach that competition is unhealthy, and they're teaching kids that government has the ability to be benevolent to you. I go back, I just gave you a whole list of where government is not doing things for your benefit. Again, I mentioned I want to give you more statistics. The government owns, I just found my notes, 640 million acres, as I said. It's 28% of all land in the United States is owned by the government. So the only asset the government can really put into the sovereign fund is land. That's it. So don't be surprised if you see that happen. And then they'll sell it off or they'll collateralize it. By the way, there's history for that. If you go back to the railroad land grants that were done, if you look at the whole Teapot Dome scandal many of you have heard about, that was leasing oil reserves and leasing land to they were monetizing it for government. Well, it got screwed up real fast and it became untrustworthy real fast. Russia, you go to their experience from the 1990s on. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia had to privatize its companies. How did it do it? It didn't do it through a democratized capital market like the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. It did it by the politicians giving companies to their friends. So their friends owned these great big companies. That's the risk you have with a sovereign fund. Government, when it tries to monetize those assets, will let its friends buy the companies out, and they'll usually be when the companies aren't doing so well. So the person buys a company very, very cheap, turns around, flips it, and sells it to another private equity company, makes a bunch of money, and you and I get screwed. So they're going to tell you all the good things about the sovereign fund. I think we need to peel away the onion and find out if, in fact, it's going to be just a real estate play, which, given Trump's background, wouldn't surprise me in the least. But I think it's something for all of us to be leery of. Don't give power to Washington. You'll never get it back. How often do we now hear senators and congresspeople talk about your rights granting by government? The Bill of Rights doesn't grant you an unlimited right to free speech. The Bill of Rights doesn't grant me anything. It keeps government from imposing on my rights. And we, the people, need to see through that. And we need to fight for politicians who will take that Bill of Rights and enforce it and use it for what it was intended, and that is to keep the United States federal government off our backs. Yes, we had examples like the Depression in which we allowed the Social Security system to be built. We got to have a program about that and talk about it ad nauseum. But we've seen through the Great Society, too much government just destroys things. I want you to remember, government doesn't solve problems. it transfers them. So when the government tells you, we're going to solve this problem for you, they don't. They take it from you and they give it to this person. Or they give it to the future generation. And then once you get it, they can't get you out of it. So they keep it. So think about as you go forward, can you trust the government? I mean, I've shown you 20 examples of why you can't. And it doesn't change. And how they use it now to go into a sovereign fund, which will have all the same problems that the real estate bubble did, the Teapot Dome scandal did, and all the other scandals. So don't buy into it. Well, anyway, I appreciate you joining me today. Feel free to write questions to Steve at stevebeaman.com or send me a direct message. A lot of the ideas I get for programming are going to come out of you. Again, I'm new at this. I've started doing this a week ago. This is my 5th or 6th. I hope you're enjoying them. I hope they're getting a little more entertaining. But I look forward to communicating with you and building that dialogue with you as we go forward to build that more perfect union. Please visit stevebeaman.com. Look for one of my books through Amazon or one of my master classes that are available. And let me know what I can do to help. Again, especially if you're starting a business, running a small business, it'd be my great pleasure to help you. So thank you much. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you tomorrow.